Do you think of yourself as more of a careful person or a careless person? Personality tendency is really what I'm talking about. If there's a continuum, careful to careless, where would you be on it? Careful in the sense of be careful, cautious, assessing the risk, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, trying to manage things, keep things under control, or more tending toward the careless in the sense of whatever, go with the flow, not always worried about the consequences. Where might you imagine yourself to be on the careful to careless continuum? Well, I thought of that, by the way, and I thought, oh, that's a little too affirming, and I want us to be challenged. But it's good. I love it. By the way, I dig dialogue, so that's cool that you did that. So, right, some of you carefree. We'll get there, though, I think. We'll get to the carefree. Careless, careful, somewhere in between. Where do we lean? Well, in the story this morning, we have some religious leaders coming up to Jesus, and the religious leaders are careful, right? They're trying to manage things, hold it together, keep things manageable, under control, and they're critical of Jesus because he's eating with, which is a way of saying I affirm or care about, people that they think of as too careless. They label them sinners. And certainly in the, I'll call it, literal definition of sin, separation from God, from other people, from who they really are as God's beloved. Of course they have lived that at times because they are human. So Jesus is eating with people who are human. And the religious leaders are upset. And their strategy, if people lived in ways of separation or ways they thought of as careless or at times harmful, is that you should make those people feel really guilty or shame them, and that this is the way you change behavior. And Jesus isn't doing that. Jesus is loving them, embracing them. So very different strategies, yes? So Jesus then, because of this exchange, he tells a series of parables. And as one New Testament professor I know says, that when Jesus has something important to say, he tells a story. And we heard one of those today. And as you heard in the story, we've got a father who is wealthy and two sons, a younger and an older. And the younger son comes to dad and asks for his share of the inheritance. What usually has to happen to a father before the kids get their inheritance? Right, it's supposed to be dead. He's not dead yet. So in essence, the son's saying, Dad, I know you're not dead, but I want what's coming to me. And this was not done in that time and place. It was completely inappropriate. It was a way of saying to his dad, you're dead to me. But the dad acquiesces, divides the property, gives this son what would have been his after the death of the father, gives it to him ahead of time. And we hear that the son then goes away. And in the worldview of Jesus, the audience telling this story, that when people live in communion or covenant connection with God and with their community, they have the best resources to engage what is generous and creative and life-giving. But when people choose to go away from that, be separate from that, then more likely they are going to live something dissolute, chaotic, harmful to themselves and to others. And sure enough, in the story, as the son goes away, his life comes unraveled. It comes undone. Until he gets to this point, as you heard in the story, where he is slopping pigs. And he's so hungry, he's thinking of maybe eating some of the pig slop. Anyone recognize if people who are Jewish are really fans of pigs? No, right? Unclean. So culturally, in the way the people hearing this story, this is horrifying. This is a way of telling the story where this young man has hit the bottom from the perspective of the people hearing this story. He's at this bottom place, and sometimes when people are at the bottom, they try to further go away or feel like there's nowhere to go. But he remembers that he has a place of care and of love in his father's family and in his father's home. And there's this connection as he's remembering these things. the storyteller, Jesus, says he came to himself. And there's this idea that sometimes when we remember who we are and to whom we belong, we come to ourselves. We come back to ourselves. We can get lost, but we wake up to who we are and a place that we might have. And so that's one of the reasons, by the way, we gather for worship or have spiritual practices, partly to remember who and whose we are, to come to ourselves, to be awake. So he wakes up. I don't have to be here. And he repents. And I'm using that more religiously loaded term on purpose, as you heard Pastor John talking about last week. I mean, repent just means turn around or change your thinking. And so he's going to take a U-turn. It doesn't mean he's evil. It just meant he went down one road and like, this is not a good road to go down. Like Oracle most days. And he turns around. And he starts heading to his father's house. And on his way, he's thinking about how he can frame this. He knows he's messed up big time. So he's thinking about, here's what I've got to say to Dad. Here's what's helpful. Here's what he needs to hear, etc. And then you notice, though, in the story, that while he's still a long way off, he hasn't said anything, the father sees him coming and starts bounding down the path toward his son. Now, this might get lost on us, but people hearing this story, if you are a wealthy patriarch in Israel, you don't go bounding down paths to people. People come to you. So this is a story that's saying he's breaking all the norms, all the expectations. He is running toward his son. And he's ready to embrace him, to love him, to welcome him before the son says a word. This is a reminder that the truth of who this father is grace, forgiveness, mercy, love, embrace. He doesn't need an apology to love his son. He's already got it for him. So then it's clear when the son shows up and is being embraced and offers his little speech, it's not for the dad. The dad's already got the forgiveness and love for his son. It's clear that the words of, I'm sorry and I made a mistake, are for the son. We talked about this a few weeks ago, how there's even neurological research that what we say aloud with our mouths frames our self-understanding and our actions. So he needs to say it for himself, a commitment to, I'm letting go of that path and I'm receiving the care and embrace of my father. And that dad already, like, he's holding the son's like, probably to the dad, like, yeah, whatever you need to say. Get the fatted calf, get the robe, get the rings. It's not just like, oh, I'm glad you're back. It's a all stops pulled out kind of party, this celebration, the biggest thing that you could imagine. He's doing this to celebrate that his son has returned, all for him, the one who screwed everything up. A party thrown just because he came back. That much love, that much grace. So instead of living carelessly that brought chaos and destruction, the son now is letting himself be cared for, being embraced. And I trust that this will empower the son, instead of making a mess more of things, that he'll be able to be caring and care for others. And I will tell you, for years, when this would come up the lectionary, I talked about everyone called it the prodigal son. Well, let's talk about the prodigal son. But I remember, and so I thank you, here's a way God can still be speaking, through a congregation member who said, what about that older brother? There's some story going on there, isn't there? Yes, there is. Now, I know sometimes it's easy first just to blank out the older brother, but also to think, well, he's the dutiful good boy. But Jesus is telling the story of the older brother because he's got some issues too. So the older brother, he never went anywhere, right? He's like the George Bailey character in It's a Wonderful Life. Stay there dutifully doing all the right things. I'm not saying in heart he's like George Bailey, but just if you know that story, right? Just stayed there, didn't go away, didn't waste anything, followed the rules, did what he was supposed to do. But Jesus is saying, even when you act like that, you can still get lost. Because he's not doing the right things empowered by the grace and love and care of his father or his family. He's doing it himself. He is self-righteous. He's been doing what he's been doing all on his own. So he didn't physically go anywhere, but he's living in separation from the grace, the mercy, the abundance that is rightfully his, but he's cut himself off from it. And the sign that he's cut himself off from grace and mercy is he doesn't have any grace and mercy to offer. Because, this is the brother whose brother, everyone thought he was dead, and he's come home. He doesn't even want to go into the party. He's so upset. How dare you give things to this undeserving person? Well, when that's the attitude, that's a reminder that we've not received all the gifts and mercy that are for us. Because if we do, then we have it to share. And notice that the father in the story, he treats his sons the same way. That it's a posture of you belong and I love you, and the party, you can come into the party. Everything I have is yours. So he doesn't guilt or shame the older son. He's like, the whole time you've been here, you haven't let it in, but everything I have is yours. So come join the party. Come be part of life. Come let yourself be cared for, so that you, instead of being grumpy, will care for your brother, care for others. And I suspect that one of the reasons this is one of the better known parables is because if we let it in, it can speak to us no matter who we are or where we are in life's journey. Because if we see ourselves or have been told we're more the careless, oh, you're a screw up, or I feel like, oh, I always make the mistakes, I can never do anything right, I feel like I don't belong or I don't fit, whatever ways that we've hurt ourselves or hurt others, may we feel guilty or ashamed about it, Jesus is telling this story for us. Jesus is saying God is like that parent who never says, you're dead to me. God is like the parent who's already running out to embrace you before you even say you're sorry. That's the kind of love and grace and mercy that God, that Spirit has for us, and that those who let God be at work in us, that we would have for each other. That's the embrace. That's the love. That's the forgiveness. So let yourself be cared for. And then sometimes we're more like the careful older brother. I relate more to that one, right? Try to keep things managed, do the right thing, do what's supposed to be good, but then it can just rely on my own power and my own ability, and I can focus so much on, or we could focus so much on trying to get it right or do it right, that we're cut off from the grace and mercy, forgiveness and love that is being offered to us. And so we end up living really small, even though we tried to live the right ways. And the sign of the smallness of living is when we don't have the capacities to want to forgive and love and embrace others, especially the others that we think are the ones that messed up. Because if we let ourselves be cared for, the story is saying, then we will have care to offer to others. And so I think about how what we would call, and we've been talking on this Lenten spiritual journey about, and we talk each week really, about what we'd call spiritual practices, whether it's worshiping in community, your own prayer and meditation, centering prayer. For some of us, it's the yoga that you do, or the bike ride you take, or meaningful conversations with others, but those are ways that we let ourselves be cared for. So whether we see ourselves as careless or more careful, when we engage those practices, we're stopping and letting ourselves be cared for by God, by others. We're hearing that there's a party called the Reign of God, and we can be part of it, and that we can be embraced and centered and nurtured in that, and then we're better equipped to be those who embrace and nurture and equip others and love others. I was thinking, as I was reading the story this week, I had this memory coming back about a time a friend of mine, she'd gone through an incredibly difficult time, and I was one of her closest friends and had really walked with her through that journey. And there had been some healing and help and strength, and she was kind of got her feet under her again. And for her, one of the ways to live into this healing that she had, is she wanted to have a dinner party. So she was throwing a party and invited people, and I got invited. And as I arrived, I happened to arrive at the same time as a couple other people who I just sort of vaguely knew. They weren't part of the same close inner circle of friends, but they were friends of hers. And as we arrived, she welcomed all of us, but then she was paying more attention to those other people. And in the party, I wasn't ignored, but there was a sense of she's giving all this attention to these people that I don't really know very well. And I started to feel a little off. And I could feel this grumpiness rising up in me. And I knew that wasn't right. But I wasn't able, because I'm interacting with people and I'm not really very self-aware in that moment, except that I've got a feeling inside of me. So I decided the best thing I can do is just separate myself for a little bit. So I went into the bathroom and I prayed, which is a reminder, you can pray no matter who you are or where you are. Because I don't feel right. I don't feel part of the celebration. What's going on? And I took a few moments to be quiet. Not too many moments, because there was just one bathroom. And I started to have the sense of a question came to me. Well, did you love and care for your friend so she'd pay more attention to you? No. It's who we are together. And then there was this awareness, you two are good. You already trust each other. You belong to one another, and you know this, and she knows this, so she doesn't have to pay as much attention to you. She needs to pay more attention to the people who don't know they belong. You know where everything is in this house. You could actually be the helper hosting instead of sitting there being grumpy that you're not getting enough attention. And it shifted my understanding. That's one of the gifts of prayer, when we leave room and space to listen. And I went back into the party, not worried about was she paying attention to me, but a sense of I'm already cared for, I already belong. My job is to care for and help other people know they're belonging. I know the story about a dinner party, it's kind of mundane, but it hits a principle that I think affects us, whether we're thinking about war in Ukraine or who comes across the border or how we treat refugees or people different than ourselves. And we're reminded, yep, some of us were more careful, some of us more careless. Jesus is saying, wherever you are on that journey, let yourself be cared for. Receive the embrace of God every day. Receive the embrace of others who are embodying God's love and care for you. And then you're better empowered to care for others, to be caring. And God knows the world needs more of that. Amen.